He tormented me for 6 years. I waited until he needed me most, and then I simply told the truth. Garrison and I grew up on the same street, attended the same schools from age 7 through 17, and occupied for the entirety of that decade completely different positions in the social architecture of every environment we shared. He was at the top of it. I was not. I want to be precise about what his bullying looked like because the word itself has become broad enough to obscure the specific texture of different experiences. Garrison was not physically aggressive. He was socially precise. He had an instinct for identifying the thing a person was most uncertain about and applying pressure there with enough deniability that any adult who witnessed it could dismiss it as teasing. He did this to several people across those years, but he did it to me with a consistency that suggested I had been selected rather than stumbled upon. The targets shifted as we aged. In primary school, it was my clothes, which were not the right brands because my family could not afford the right brands. In secondary school, it was my academic performance, which was strong and which Garrison reframed for our peer group as the consolation prize of someone who had nothing else going for them. By our final years, it was subtler, a consistent low-level narrative distributed through the social network of our year group that positioned me as someone not quite worth taking seriously. I did not retaliate across any of those years. Not because I was passive, but because I was patient in the specific way of someone who has decided that the long view is the only view that produces anything worth having. I watched Garrison carefully. I learned how he operated. I stored what I learned with no immediate plan for its use and trusted that a plan would eventually become apparent. We left school and moved in different directions. I went to university, then into a career in civil engineering that grew steadily into something I was proud of. Garrison, through the mutual acquaintances that small hometown networks produce, went into property development, an industry that suited his particular combination of charm and ambition and that rewarded his ability to read rooms and manage impression. He was good at it. I will not pretend otherwise because accuracy matters more to me than narrative convenience. He built a genuine career and a genuine reputation, and by our mid-30s he was a person of some standing in the regional development community. We crossed paths professionally for the first time when I was 34. My firm was engaged as engineering consultants on a mixed-use development project for which Garrison's company was the primary developer. He recognized me at the first project meeting. His expression moved through recognition and then through a rapid recalibration. The expression of someone deciding how to position a complicated history in a professional context. He was warm. Professionally warm, the kind that costs nothing and implies everything. I matched his register exactly and gave him nothing beyond it. The project ran for 18 months. I was competent and reliable and documentedly so. Every assessment thorough, every timeline met, every communication clear and recorded. I was building something across those 18 months that had nothing to do with engineering. The situation that required the truth arrived in the project's final quarter. A structural assessment I had completed identified a significant issue with the foundation specifications that the original contractor had signed off on. The issue was not dangerous at current stage, but would become dangerous post-completion without remediation. Remediation was expensive and would delay handover by several weeks. Garrison needed the project to deliver on time. He had investors whose patience had a specific and documented limit. He came to me privately and asked whether the assessment finding was something that could be, and he chose his word carefully, reconsidered. I want to be precise about what he was asking. He was not asking me to falsify documentation outright. He was asking me to find a professional framing that would allow the finding to be deprioritized. He was asking me, in the language of plausible deniability that he had been fluent in since we were 7 years old, to help him with something that my professional ethics and my engineering license made impossible. I told him I could not do that. I told him the assessment stood as documented. I told him the remediation was necessary and that my firm's recommendation would reflect that without qualification. He pushed. The warmth recalibrated into pressure, which recalibrated briefly into something that had the same texture as the version of him I had known on that street for a decade. The specific tone of someone accustomed to getting what they wanted from people he had correctly identified as below him in whatever hierarchy he was operating within. I let him finish. Then I told him that our professional correspondence was documented in full, that my assessment was filed and timestamped, and that any pressure applied to alter a structural finding would constitute a serious regulatory matter that I would be obligated to report. He went very still. The remediation was completed. The project delivered late. The investor relationship apparently survived with difficulty. I filed my documentation and closed the project and submitted my final report with the same professional thoroughness I had applied to everything across those 18 months. I did not report the conversation in which he had asked me to reconsider the finding. I had considered it and decided the documented assessment was consequence enough for a man whose entire professional standing rested on a reputation for reliable delivery that had just taken a significant, expensive, and very visible hit. I heard through the professional network some months later that the project's delayed handover had cost Garrison a follow-on contract he had been positioned to win. I received this information neutrally and did not seek further detail. 6 years of precise, deniable social pressure. 18 months of documented professional excellence. One structural finding filed accurately and without compromise. The patience required was considerable. It was, as I had trusted it would be, entirely worth it.